Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War News Update. First part there for the 29th of May 2024. My goodness, isn't time accelerating? Actually, I think it's probably staying fairly constant. But there you go. Just a little heads up to some people. Alan Doherty gave me this warning. Hiya Jonathan, just to let you know that scammers are back and asking your subscribers to join your platform so that you can send them their prize they pick before joining. Just be warned, if anyone is on the threads that looks like me, has an avatar of mine that's asking you for things, it is a scam. I will not be doing that. That's not how I operate. So just be warned. And thanks for letting me know when that does happen. I don't know if there's anything I can do about that. I've not seen any of these, but they are obviously about. Right, let's go to the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. You can find them in the usual place, which is in the description to the video below. A couple of noteworthy categories today. So 1,300 personnel lost is still a pretty high number. We're well over 1,000 in that kind of middle between 1,000 and 1,780, which was the very highest number we've seen, but that's quite an outlier. 8 tanks is back down again. 33 armored personnel vehicles is significant. That's about double the average. 37 artillery systems, over double the average there. So fairly significant losses in those categories. Indicates that the Ukrainians are still doing a lot of work with their FPV drones, taking out artillery, counter battery fire, taking out artillery, so on and so forth. 2 multiple launch rocket systems, 56 vehicles and fuel tanks is a fairly high number in that category, and 20 pieces of special equipment is very high. So I don't know what the basis of that number there is, but the special equipment can be things like excavators, might even be deminers, comms equipment, all sorts of stuff can fall under that category there. Right. Moving on then, we're going to see a couple of Andrew Perpetua lists, one from the day before and then one from the last sort of 24 hours or so. This one, as you can see, is about a 2-to-1 loss advantage Russian to Ukrainian. So that's good for the Ukrainians, but not as good as they'd like. But actually, most of the Ukrainian, literally over half the Ukrainian losses are boats. So this is all taken from one, I would have thought, montage. This here we have a lot of destroyed boats. So these are that's a bit of a heavy toll for the activities down on Dnipro River. Electronic warfare and engineering vehicle also damaged there. As far as APCs, 3 M113s, nothing too significant outside of the boats there. It's difficult to know without looking through all of that footage whether those boats how serious, whether they were just little boats that they had requisitioned off locals, sort of fishing boat type things, or whether they were military boats and whether they were manned with people or not. When we look at the Russian losses, we start with a number of D20s and 30 artillery pieces, your older bits of kit there, and then go down to tanks. A T90 abandoned. A lot of T90s seem to be being lost at the moment. Tracked garden shed, a lot of those falling by the wayside, and quite a number of infantry fighting vehicles of all different variants. So BMP-1s, BMP-3s there, some unknown ones, BMDs, BTRs, so on and so forth. Lots of letters. And then trucks, all-terrain vehicles, and only a couple of civilian vehicles there, and some unknown vehicles. They just don't know what they are. They are so fundamentally destroyed. What does that tell us? I mean, the Russians have lost a greater mass of stuff than the Ukrainians. Ukrainians losing a lot of boats. You can try and work out who's had the better day there. Then when we look at the most recent one he's posted, it's probably let's think, maybe if you're lucky, a 3-to-1 advantage, probably a 2.5-to-1 loss ratio there of Russian to Ukrainian losses. We start with the Ukrainians. There's an AHS Crab that's damaged there. A Grad BM-21 multiple launch rocket system damaged. A Bogdana, the Ukrainian indigenously made self-propelled gun. So some fairly decent bits of kit, but damaged. Lancer on the Crab failed to penetrate, so you'd imagine that would be back on the road fairly swiftly, if not straight away. Then with the infantry fighting vehicles, we've got 3 Bradleys damaged in there. Luckily, none of these are destroyed, really. Not very many of the first few categories do we have destroyed. Got a Senator that's been captured. That's a Rochelle Senator, the Canadian-made armoured personnel carrier, and a Humvee that's destroyed there. Other than that, usual civilian vehicles and whatnot. We'll go and look at the Russian losses, see the comparison. Quite a few bits of surveillance and comms equipment. Recovery vehicle also damaged in there. They're losing quite a number of those at the moment, although that is only damaged. And again, a lot of D-30 howitzers. What does that tell us? When a lot of the artillery is at the moment these very, very old towed howitzers, rather than anything new, self-propelled guns and whatnot, although there are a few of those on there as well. We've got an Uragan, that's a multiple launch rocket system, BM-27 there, damaged. Most of those, however, are damaged rather than destroyed. The thing about hitting a towed howitzer with an FPV drone, it's a lot more difficult to completely destroy a howitzer than it is to destroy a self-propelled gun. So with a self-propelled gun, because you're driving around with a gun in it, you have the mechanics of the vehicle, you have the gun itself, and then you have the artillery on board. Whereas with towed howitzers, you want to try and keep the artillery a little bit further away, the ammunition a little bit further away from the gun. And so if you get a drone that hits, it's going to basically hit the metal parts of the weapon that are possibly a lot more difficult to completely disable than, say, a self-propelled gun, where you can disable the track. You can, depending on how it's set up, you can get inside a hatch, you can make the ammunition cook off and fundamentally disassemble the piece of kit. And so I think you'll probably find a lot more artillery pieces, towed out artillery pieces, get listed as damaged. Also because it's much more difficult to tell whether they are destroyed or not. You can often tell whether a self-propelled gun is destroyed because it's a smoking husk left, but towed howitzers don't normally go like that. So moving on to tanks, T90M here, 2 of those, 1 destroyed, 1 damaged. I'd love to see the list of T90Ms now. They must have chewed through their stocks of their most recent tank and capable tank, the T90 Breakthrough. Just a lot of those on the list these days. Infantry fighting vehicles, a list of BMP 1s, 2s, 3s, BMDs, BTRs, and so on and so forth, and a tracked garden shed BMP 2 thrown into the mix as well. A number of APCs and trucks and civilian vehicles. So I think the Russians will have lost, they won't be so happy with that, even though the Ukrainians did have quite a few Bradleys and fairly nice bits of kit damage. I think the Russians have, on balance, have had a worse day with that list there. Now, somebody, Faithless, who is a follower of the channel, has taken Andrew's lists and messed around with them to see if he can produce a way that's has utility for, or presents itself in a way that's easy to read. So here he's played around with the list and said, right, here's a summary of Russian losses against Ukrainian losses. So there's an actual number there, 61 to 30. So you can see in this list from the 27th, so that's a couple of days ago now, but it gives you an idea. We have a 2-to-1 loss advantage, Russian to Ukrainian, and it lists all the different losses in type there, and then there are different ways he sort of slices and dices it. So here we have 31 destroyed against 9 destroyed, and that is and then there was another one there of damaged, so on and so forth. So you can look at these in a number of different ways. See if I've got the damage list there as well. Here we go. So that's a damage list. I'll add that just to give you the full suite of images there. And oops, that's one. So there we go. That's the damage. So you have the destroyed, damaged, and together that gives you a full sense of what was going on that particular day. So I will play around with seeing how useful these are for understanding what these stats are. But thank you very much for Faithless, who has put the time into doing that. I think a bit of code that takes the data and then puts it out like this. These people are very clever, aren't they? Okay. We are moving on to looking at, actually I haven't got too much footage to reference here. Here's a BM-21 Grad multiple launch rocket system in the Kupiansk front. This is an area where the Ukrainians would love to do a lot more. There's the issue with firing into Russia. So the Russians have got a lot of kit their side of the border, and the restrictions on Ukrainian, particularly kind of short to medium range weaponry, means that they feel uncomfortable firing into the Russian territory. Now, there's been an awful lot of discussion, and it continues. It's rumbling on even today. There's an awful lot of people and nations coming up with statements about whether Ukraine should be able to use weaponry. So we've got a whole list of countries that said you definitely can. So Finland and Poland, UK, although UK is not 100% clear. I think there were some ambiguous statements, but it is understood that the UK is up for that. In fact, they must be, because we are led to believe that the Ukrainians have actually used Storm Shadows into Russia. We'll come to that in the next segment. And apparently even Scholz seems to be getting on side with this. So you've got Macron in France, Scholz as well, saying, with a few conditions applied, like I think Macron has said that if you are targeting pieces of kit that are fired at you type thing, then that's fine. So he's like, not a complete carte blanche, to use a French term, for Ukraine to strike whatever they like in Russia, but it's a case of, if you're going to take out a BM-21 Grad multiple launch rocket system that's been firing at you, if you're going to take out an S-300, S-400 system, then go for it. You can use French weapons. So there's this growing momentum, and it really is mainly the US that we're waiting for, and there are indications that they are discussing that, and it's close. They are close to a decision, but who knows? Jane Kiev here talks about a German article came out yesterday. This caused a bit of a ruckus. So a year ago, when Ukraine first got a Patriot battery, they used it to take down 4 Russian aircraft in one day. You remember, we've seen the notches on the side of the Patriot system with the guy standing next to it. So we know that the Patriot battery took those airframes out in Bryansk, north of the border. So here we have a German piece of kit being used to destroy Russian stuff north of the border inside Russian territory, which is exactly what we're talking about. But apparently when that happened, and there were rumors about this before, the US and Germany threatened to cut off all assistance if it ever happened again. Now that is, to me, insane. It's like, oh, well done, you've done an amazing job in shooting down these aircraft. 4, it says here, but I think 5 in one day were taken out. And suddenly it's like, yeah, well done you, excellent. Ever do that again, you won't get any more weapons off us. I think it's absolutely outrageous. I mean, if there's ever an example of this is the tying of the hands behind the backs to fight with those constraints on them. This is it. This is just, I think it's heinous. It just really, really irritates me. Anyway, it could be that is now sort of changing as people realize what a ridiculous constraint that is. And then talking about recruits, I would normally have this a little bit earlier before the equipment. I've talked about this over the last week on different days using different numbers that people are suggesting. Torda Ara Iversen from Norway says that Russia recruits around 30,000 men a month is widely quoted number. Using Scholz's casualty figure, this leaves a surplus of 6,000 for new units. Don't treat this calculation as exact science, but an indicator. So he's talking about a number that Scholz has talked about, which is Russia suffers around 24,000 soldiers killed or seriously injured per month during its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Now, somebody rightly said yes, I was talking about the average deaths over the course of the war, which has gone up to something like 626, right? That's general staff figures. So first of all, you have to accept the general staff are correct, but if you're going to accept 626 over the course of war, and if they're losing, if they're recruiting 1,000 a day, then that's a number of 375 that they are able to increase their reserves by on a daily basis. But of course, that's taking the average over the entire war. And when you look at the last year, when you look since October, say, they have been losing 1,000 a day. I mean, that average has gone up from sort of 300 and something to 600 and something because of the last 9 months. And actually, when you look at the last 9 months, they would have to be recruiting even more to overcome the huge losses they're having in those 9 months. So it's going to be interesting to see where their recruitment is at now compared to, say, 9 months ago. And it could be you're starting to see the reserves are fully trained up now that have been recruited some time ago. There are lots of claims about recruitment. There was talk about vans going around Moscow and collecting people, or bundling them into the back of the van type thing, which we hadn't heard for some time. So that looks like a sort of klepto mobilization and a crypto mobilization, both stealing and crypto, sort of under the radar, faking it, not really telling anyone about it. But I am particularly worried for the Ukrainians in terms of the Russians' ability to recruit from abroad. More and more photos are coming out of the Russian armed forces just being full of foreign fighters. And that, I think, is a real rich seam of recruitment potential for the Russians that they are definitely capitalizing on at the moment. And I think that's something that the Ukrainians can't do. And what that also means is that the Russians won't feel that back at home. They won't have those mothers and family members protesting against the Kremlin. They couldn't give a toss if some people in a village over in Sudan or in Cuba or wherever gets upset that their son has disappeared off to Russia and never to be seen again. Russia couldn't care less. They care about the internal popularity and perception of the war, and this is one way of getting around that. So not only do they just have this almost endless supply of people, since there are an awful lot of people that want, scare quote, social mobility, or indeed social mobility is a euphemism for a shortcut to death. There seems to be this endless supply of people there, and I think Russia are onto something in that respect, and it will allow them to perpetuate this war for far longer than if they were just relying on Russian soldiers, Russian population. So that's a real challenge for the Ukrainians. Now, when it comes to distance munitions and whatnot, 13 of 14 kamikaze drones were intercepted by the Ukrainians, so that is one that's escaped. But the interception rate is still really impressive. I've seen that there's an order from a European nation for Skynex ammunition. Skynex is the new kind of Gepard, the one that just fires just stupendous amounts of lead into the air that Rheinmetall made. Now, I presume that's an order that's actually for Ukraine, because I don't know that many European nations are using the Skynex yet. It's a relatively new system, and I don't know that you'd be needing to make big acquisitions of ammunition for that. So I wonder whether they've got at least 2 of these, possibly more now, Skynex systems in key positions. They could be particularly effective at taking out drones like this. So I wonder if that's why the interception rate has improved. Who knows? Of course, the radar network and everything else has been consistently improved. Odessa was hit yesterday by Russian Iskander-M missile, target unknown. I haven't seen any further details about that, but there was some pretty big, there were some images of a pretty big explosion there. Then going back to the strikes on Luhansk that happened a couple of nights ago, there's still no finer detail other than a bit of satellite imagery that gives us some cause for speculation as to what was taken out. So these big strikes far back into Luhansk with ATACMS missiles, and it caused huge fires. It caused wildfires as well as, it appears, big explosions. Now, here is what one source says. So Planet satellite images show 17 days before that strike on Luhansk Aviation School airfield. On May the 10th, parts of the Russian integrated multifunctional radar system NEBO-M were present there. So that is a NEBO-M system, and then that's what the ground looks like now. So the speculation is that NEBO-M could be no longer with us. I was unable to ID this vehicle with certainty. Might be an RLMKU or KURLK, sorry. I also want to underline an important caveat again. This Planet HR image was taken 17 days prior to the strike. However, I have noticed many changes to the tracks in the field in the meantime. So there could have been a number of things driving around and doing whatnot. But also says, if this video is related to the strike, I can confirm two things. The NEBO-M vehicles were there at the time. The third previously unidentified vehicle is the KURLK command vehicle. We also need to bear in mind that we don't know if or how severely the NEBO-M vehicles were damaged. The one in the video doesn't look too bad, and the driver is seen running around alive. So there's a bit of a video there. So it might not be as big a damage as one. This is taken from that one of looking around at all the fires around, and it's supposing that vehicle was the NEBO-M. So the NEBO-M is this big radar array sort of system. 2011, it's fairly recent bit of kit. Exactly, what configuration, what vehicle was taken out, I don't know. I was asking the AI on Microsoft how much this costs as a system, what's its value, and actually it doesn't know. So there's a number of bits of Russian kit that just aren't the numbers for in terms of the cost on the internet. There's a few times I've come across vehicles where it's just like there's no answer. Anyway, you can assume that it's going to be a fairly expensive piece of kit if that was taken out. If you want to know the composition, deployment, and some details of it, you can pause the video now. That's the NEBO-M. Designed for detecting and tracking various types of airborne objects, including aircraft and ballistic missiles, features multiple programmable multiband design, making it versatile for different scenarios. It includes a central data fusion capability, allowing it to process information from multiple radars, and it can detect fifth generation fighters like the F-22 and F-35. So there you go. That's the NEBO-M. Now, speaking of using missiles into Russia, Ukraine, according to the advisor to the Ministry of Defense, Yuri Suk, Kyiv has already launched Storm Shadow missiles attacks on Russia with the permission of the UK. One presumes that's not just into Crimea. Ukraine is now developing its own types of weapons, which the Ukrainian armed forces will use to attack targets in the territory of the Russian Federation. So there may be a bit of clarity there, maybe actually not. Right, moving on to other bits and pieces. Prisoner exchanges between Moscow and Kyiv have been suspended for several months, according to Russian Ombudsman Tatiana Moskalkova. So no prisoners swapped for some time. Speaking of prisoners, though, Russian authorities do not allow Ukrainian POWs to call home. Under the Geneva Convention, POWs' privileges include regular communication with home at least twice a month. Ukraine has gone further, though, allowing 15-minute conversations and regularly opens its main POW camp to the ICRC, the UN, and international journalists. According to the Associated Press, denial of this right is a violation of the international humanitarian law, contrary to the principle of humane treatment of POWs. Okay, why this might be significant, and this is perhaps Russia losing out here. So although Russia want to just be harsh on its prisoners, Ukraine allowing 15-minute conversations of their prisoners back to home is, I think, good. Not just good PR to the third-party countries in terms of like, look, we're following the letter of the law. We're doing what is good and right and proper in terms of prosecuting this war, and Russia aren't. Okay, so we get that kind of advantage there. And that plays well with the international audience, or it should do. But also, these people phoning home will be playing on the people at home's sense of morale, pressure they're putting on their government to get their family members freed, and all sorts of stuff like that. I think it's useful for the Ukrainians that these POWs can speak to their family members. To tell them how kind of relatively well they're being treated, which then is interesting, and it allays fears about who the Ukrainians are, and goes against the idea that if you get captured, which is a prevailing thought, this is why you see so many Russians committing suicide, because they're told in no uncertain terms that they will be killed, tortured and killed by the Ukrainians, and they genuinely believe that. So they think it's a fate that is better than being captured is to commit suicide. So there are so many videos of Russians committing suicide that you can ruin your mind with watching at the moment, but that's going to be partly behind it, and that will sort of counter that narrative by allowing POWs to speak to their family members at home and say they're being relatively well treated. And as mentioned, it will just hopefully breed this sense of discontent among the Russian population. This war is going on, their family members are captured as POWs, and then when the Russians don't seem to have done an awful lot to try and get those troops back, then that discontent manifests in different ways in the Russian society. Okay, a huge cyber incident has taken place across Russia. The delivery company CDEK, the equivalent to UPS, has been experiencing a disruption for a few days and was unable to deliver any shipments. Head mayor hacktivists claimed the attack using ransomware, and that's been confirmed by a couple of sources. So that is interesting that cyber warfare is going both ways, as well you can imagine it is. I've talked about the kind of the thinking behind how to approach cyber warfare and whether it's functionally any different from regular warfare, and in many ways it isn't. But we don't react to it because, one, we don't want escalation. So for example, when cyber attacks take place into the US from Russia, like the US has a choice, like either they react to that and talk about it openly and saying we are being attacked by Russia, and then that becomes escalatory and then you end up going to war with Russia. Or so you've got the escalation argument, but you've also got the other reason why they might not talk about it so much is because they're doing it back to Russia. And if you say, oh, look what Russia have done to us, then it opens up the Pandora's box of well, okay, well, what are you doing to Russia? Oh, maybe you're doing worse things to Russia in cyber warfare, in the cyber warfare domain. And you don't want people to know that. So that there are two reasons why cyber warfare attacks are sometimes possibly kept much lower key than you might think they would be. Final thing to note, just a little bit random here, is that there's a massive, this is June and a deep freeze has taken place in Russia. JNK saying this will likely further destroy the Russian agricultural industry. It's gone from floods right across Russia and countries around there to snow hitting in almost June time. I mean, goodness me, crazy weather we are getting. I don't want to go down that whole rabbit hole, but it is, when you look at something like this and you're thinking, oh, well, is that going to affect their agriculture? And then you're thinking, how does that affect Russia as a country being able to fund the war and prosecute their war? I don't know if this is meaningful at all, or whether it's just a random snowstorm that has little other effect. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Really appreciate all of your support. Sorry I haven't got the mapping to you yet. I'm going to work on that now, although the military aid video has an awful lot of information in it. Sweden have come out today with a huge package that I think is a very meaningful package. 10% of defense budget. Goodness me. Anyway, so lots to talk to you about, so keep tuned for that one.